Grief can either shut you down or crack you open.
Mm,
And if we can understand there's a way to process it, one step at a time. It's like to be tender and gentle with yourself and
hmm
know that um, there's going to be triggers for the rest of your life that open that grief up again. So not to be afraid of it, but to realize that what we're in the grief process, we are creating space within us to hold the love that we have for the one that we lost. And
mm,
so it can be painful when we're rearranging that space inside.
yes.
And yet, if we're willing to move along with it, we can come out on the other end, being able to live life with greater meaning and purpose. And that's what my hope is for everyone that is dealing with grief and loss and the pain of trauma.
You're like a breath of fresh air, softly blowing spring through your hair. Sunlight in the sky on your face, bringing joy and love to this place. Bring joy and love to this place in my heart. You bring joy and love to this place in my heart. You bring joy and love to this place in my heart. You bring joy and love to this place in my heart.
Hello, I'm Carol B. Brown Jones, and welcome to GG United by Love, our home for practicing love in actions. That's with the S on the end. By choosing love in every action. GG stands for grandmothers and their girls, and that includes daughters, daughter in laws, granddaughters, grandsons too, your family and your friends. If you're here, you belong here, and you are welcome. This is where we gather to share stories, wisdom, and reflections about life, love, and legacy across generations. If this speaks to your heart, I invite you to subscribe here on Substack and stay connected with our community. I am glad you're here. Well, as usual, I have another beautiful guest I'd like to introduce to you. Reverend Megan Smith Brooks is the senior minister at Unity of South Sound in Tacoma, Washington. She's been there with the congregation since 2022. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience. She's an author of Unraveling Grief, a mother's spiritual journey of healing and discovery. And she's the co founder of Unity Awakening Ways. As a certified grief coach, speakers, and workshop facilitator, she has dedicated 26 years to supporting individuals in their healing. Reverend Megan has also developed guided meditation CDs and an online grief healing course called Unraveling Grief to Thrive. But before we get started, I do just want to add that I do have a short message for you on from our sponsor, which is my own unfranchised business and shop.com. You can learn more about that at the end of this interview. And look for a more information to come. So welcome, Reverend Megan Smith Brooks. Today, I have with me, as always, another beautiful lady that we're going to hear her story. And we're going to find out different things that most people may not know about this beautiful woman. Her name is Reverend Megan Smith Brooks with us, and she is the pastor at Unity of South Sound in Tacoma, Washington. I'd like to welcome you, Reverend Megan. Thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you, Carol. I'm delighted to chat with you. It's always wonderful to connect with a beautiful, lovely lady such as yourself.
Thank you so much. So, I want to first thank you for giving me the opportunity to come to your congregation and present when you weren't even there. That was really special. I hope you got some good comments on it. I know I enjoyed being there with your congregation. They're very warm and loving.
They are, and I did have positive feedback. You had such a unique presentation, and I think that when you go into a character and kind of bring them to life, it opens your eyes in a new and fresh way. So I appreciated how you presented your material.
Thank you so much. So I always like to know what little Megan thought she wanted to be when she grew up. I mean, one reason I always ask that is because my program, I had another podcast that was targeted at girls aged 10 and 14. And so I still hope that they're getting the messages because actually who was watching was the mothers and grandmothers. And so I'm starting to talk to the mothers and grandmothers, but with the message for the girls, for them to know they can see all the women and men that I interview, and then to find out what they wanted to be when they were little and see how things progress or change. And it's interesting, even though most people aren't doing the exact same thing, in some
Mhm.
way they are. So tell us about little Megan. Where'd you grow up?
Oh, well, little Megan was born in Fairbanks, Alaska, and in the territory of Alaska. Actually, it was before it became a state. And
Oh.
my father was in the airline business, and when before I was 2 years old, we were transferred to Seattle. So the Northwest has always kind of been my home, though I've moved in and out and around and about. But am the oldest of five girls in my family. As my
Oh.
sisters like to point out, I'm the oldest one. And so my mother instilled in me a lot of being responsible and being aware of the impact you had on others. So that was kind of an underlying thing. But as a little girl, I was always curious about life. I was we would, my sisters and I, even like before I started school, we would do play acting. And my mother had this great dress up trunk with all this cool stuff she would put in. And we would just make up plays. And of course, being the oldest one, I got to assign all the roles. And maybe that was, developing leadership skills. I don't know. But we just liked living in imagination and creativity. And I always wanted to sing. And my mother, I'm grateful, encouraged us to explore our interests. So
Mm,
music was always something that was important to me, and I loved just singing whenever I could. And I thought that I would be a singer somehow. I saw myself maybe on Broadway. I also took ballet lessons, and so I loved dancing and singing and performing. And yet I was very shy. So as I got older, I noticed how I withdrew some of those early interests and inhibitions and held back from
mm,
participating in some of the ways that I wanted to.
hmm. So where did you decide to go from there since you gave up the singing and dancing career?
Well, I kind of like it was held in there. When I was in high school, I did musical plays, musical theater. I was in all the singing groups. As a matter of fact, I went to high school in Spokane, Washington, and 1974 is the year I graduated, was the year they had the World's Fair in Spokane. And my jazz group that I was in, which you had to audition to participate in, was selected to perform at the World's Fair. So that was one really fun, exciting thing I got to do, is to perform at the World's Fair with all of my friends, and um, we had little choreography that we did, and it was one of those things that in hindsight you don't realize the extraordinary opportunity that was offered these young kids to be
Mm,
out in the world. Um, and so music continued to be a part of my life. I continued to participate in groups, but it was really at church when I had opportunities to share more, and I was encouraged to step out. I took voice lessons growing up. And so it was already sort of there, but then I gave up the fact that I would like make it a career like on the big stage.
mm. That's good. It was still there. That's great. And
Mhm.
that was a wonderful opportunity for you to be able to perform at the World's Fair. That's historical.
Yeah, pretty cool. I also was in the Washington State Choir. I was one of two from my class that was accepted, and we did this. They had this big state festival with a choir, a band, and orchestra, and they made a record out of it. So I've
Oh,
actually made a record too.
okay. Well, that is something your grandchildren should have to know about grandma, that they probably would be surprised. Oh, okay. So now you are a pastor of a Unity church. Did you grow up in Unity?
Yes and no. Again, because my father, in being in the airlines and the travel business, we moved around a lot when I was growing up. My mother grew up with the Daily Word part of her home,
Mhm.
and my maternal grandmother actually started a Unity study group in West Seattle in the 1930s. So Unity was kind of embedded in my heritage. My father, though, was Presbyterian, and so as we moved around, we would go to whatever church was nearest to us, whether it was Unity or Presbyterians. I also have two of my mother's brothers that went to Baptist colleges and ended up meeting very good Baptist girls and went into seminary, and so they became Baptist pastors.
Mhm.
One of them um, led a school in the jungles of the Philippines.
Wow, interesting.
So I had this very eclectic exposure of religions and spirituality growing up, which triggered curiosity because I noticed different ways of beingness. And yet, unity was there as a foundational piece. And even in my high school years, we had the Daily Word. And so I was curious. I asked a lot of questions. And in my 20s, my mother said, "You may want to go back to unity and explore that." And
Hmm.
so that's sort of where the anchor took hold more when I was in my 20s and on my own and exploring spirituality.
Okay. So how long have you been a pastor?
Um, well, Unity has a, a credential designation, licensed Unity teacher, which means that you can teach their core classes for accreditation. It gives you some leadership accreditation that the ministers might ask you to take on some roles to speak. And so I became a licensed teacher in 1995. I really felt called to teach and to share what I'd learned and how it had transformed my life and going through a lot of challenges in my personal experience. And so I was involved at Seattle Unity Church, which is a large urban church in the Northwest area. I was teaching, I was invited to speak, I started doing weddings. I was their wedding coordinator there. I organized their volunteers. I got really involved in what I realized that I was learning behind the scenes, all the things that support a ministry. So it wasn't until 10 years later that I finally realized that what I was doing is ministry. And so I applied to seminary. And I was accepted in 2005 and I was ordained in 2007.
Okay. So it's been a good almost 20 years.
Yeah,
Yeah, time flies, doesn't it?
it does. Yeah, and in hindsight, I'm really, and I think that what I did was I answered a call to something that I felt was really moving from within me. And I had to have the courage to step out and my little self that was an introvert and afraid of being under the microscope. I realized that I had to step out of that and have the courage to express myself. I never would have seen myself as a speaker presenting to a room full of people. My little self would have been horrified.
I like what you just said, though. You had to step out of your comfort zone. Tell us about how people do that, how you encourage to to do that? What helped you?
Well, I think it was really my spiritual practice. Part of that is that as I discovered and realized the divinity within me, that we're both human and divine, and our human self lives in the outer world and we're attached to the physical senses, and so we notice what other people do. We're kind of looking like, is it okay? Will it be acceptable? Um, some people just, plow right through it, but I was more of the observer and got my messages of who I was and where I was acceptable from outside. But as I started to practice spirituality and through unity and understanding our divine nature is meant to be expressed, that we have a light that I would be doing disservice to not only myself but to the world to not share my light. And so I made a commitment to myself around the time I became a licensed teacher that said I would say yes to every opportunity that crossed my path, even if it scared me, especially if it scared me, because it would lead me to something greater to express my potential. And I really wanted to make a commitment to honor that. And so I just kept saying yes, and it opened doors and it allowed me to discover a part of myself that I never would have realized if I hadn't been courageous.
That is courageous. I love that. You just keep saying yes to yourself and
Hmm.
challenging yourself to do things that are a little scary, a little uncomfortable, but you do learn, and it just makes such a big difference in what's to come next when you step forward. And networking is another thing I like to encourage people to do. Get out in the community, get people to know who you are and what you do, and you get to find out what people need from you. That's beautiful. Where
Well,
was you?
you never know that, the one thing that you might do or say could have an impact on someone else to all of a sudden wake up and have the courage to express themselves in a greater way. And that's not the why we do what we do, but it's what we're meant to do,
Hmm,
is to express our potential and let our light shine. Um, and I think that, the things that hold us back are fear and self-doubt and worry and anxiety. Depression is an expression of when we've lost our connection with our divine.
mm-hmm,
We've hidden who we are. And so to find our way back is to have the courage to say, what would my heart really like to do today?
hmm.
And express that.
Yeah, beautiful. What were your professions before you started as a minister?
I wore many hats.
Most of
I
us
followed
have.
my dad. When I was a senior in high school and beyond, my dad decided to start a travel agency in Spokane, Washington. And so I started working with him. And I learned a lot of leadership skills from my dad. He was an entrepreneur, and you know, he was, when he was with Pan American Airlines, who now no longer exists, he took one of the first groups into Russia in the 1960s when it was not really an open doors place. So I observed that with him, and I learned, working in the travel agency then back in the mid 1970s when it was all still you write out manual tickets and you call in and you sit online forever to make reservations,
Yes,
and you were barely starting to use computers. And then I started learning to do the books. His bookkeeper taught me how to do the books, so I started learning bookkeeping skills. I took some classes around that, and so eventually I worked in a different types of travel business, including creating incentive group tours, which was really fun because I got to go as a trip director and set up the host, in the hotel and guide people around. And that was a fun time in my early 20s. But then I went into doing more bookkeeping. I worked as a assistant manager for wholesale jeweler and doing the accounts receivable. And then I worked for another company doing their accounts payable. And so I learned the basics of how to run a business. I also worked for in Montana, there's an organization called Chrysalis, and It was a place that it was a resident program for young girls that were addicted, and their parents didn't know what to do with them. And so they sent to this place where they learned life skills and working in the wildlife. And they had a home mentoring school program. And I mentored young girls and worked with them. And that was really rewarding. And that was just before I decided to apply to seminary.
Hmm. Okay. Very
So I did a
interesting.
lot of things.
Yeah, a lot of things. Traveling is always educational and
Mhm.
meeting people, new people, and just experiencing something different. That's always a great way to learn. Wonderful.
It is. And you know, one of the things that I realized that was hard for me when we moved around a lot, um, I always had like one really close friend. My sister, who was more of an extrovert, had like a whole gaggle of friends. But I realized that it opened my eyes to see that people didn't all live the same. They didn't do the same things, that every community was a little different. And being into different countries and exploring their cultures, I think it helped me to be more accepting that our differences can also be a gift. And, when we live in the same place all the time and we don't have that exposure, we don't recognize that not everybody's the same, and that's okay.
Hmm. Right. So we were all uniquely different on purpose,
Mm,
right? Each
yeah.
individual is a unique expression of spirit that was meant to be unique and not someone else, but still we're all the same.
Yeah, so I can really appreciate, the different cultures, and even within our country, we're a country of immigrants, and all of the different areas of our country, you have different accents and different social activities and different ways of being, and I think that it's fear sometimes that rejects our differences. But if we can let go of that and just accept, I can learn something from those that approach things in a different way. And it doesn't mean I have to do it that way or be that way, but it's to be curious and think, well, maybe there's something about that I might want to try out too.
Exactly. Thank you. That's so powerful. Tell us, you have written a book. You want to share us about your book?
Sure. I have it right here. Unraveling Grief, A Mother's Spiritual Journey of Healing and Discovery. I had two sons. They're 2.5 years apart, and my younger son, Justin, was murdered in 2013. And so I was already an ordained uni minister serving in Pasadena, California at the time. But as you can imagine, even though I had ministered to others dealing with grief and challenge and trauma, the personal experience is something we have to walk ourselves. And so as I navigated my own grief experience, at the same time that I was serving as a minister, I observed a lot of things. I observed how people handle grief, how they avoid grief, how they're uncomfortable talking about grief. People were uncomfortable with bringing it up around me. They didn't know what to say. And so I recognized from a spiritual perspective that how we embrace and navigate and process grief is important. It's part of our healing, it's a part of our spiritual evolution, it's a way of transforming life experiences. And so I asked myself a lot of questions about grief. Who is this thing? And I realized that grief really is our friend. It opens us up when we're willing to go into the dark abyss of that pain and trauma, that we realize something about ourselves that we may never have understood. And there's a gift in that. And so I felt like it was important to share my journey, my relationship with my son and what I'd learned along the way, but then how we can use grief as a way for spiritual transformation. And so that was, and it was a healing process for me that I was called to do that.
I'm sure that it did help you get through it. I have also lost a child, my daughter, Adia, who's the artist, paint this picture and
Uh,
image on my books and many others. She was older. We lost her in 2023 from cancer. She's 48. So I know the mother's pain, and I can imagine the shock of losing your son. And grief is difficult, and it's difficult to, at the time of it, to convince somebody that it's a gift.
oh, absolutely. So, I actually became a certified grief coach, the process when I felt like I wanted to be able to support others. Because grief can either shut you down or crack you open.
Mm,
And if we can understand there's a way to process it, one step at a time. It's like to be tender and gentle with yourself and
hmm
know that um, there's going to be triggers for the rest of your life that open that grief up again. So not to be afraid of it, but to realize that what we're in the grief process, we are creating space within us to hold the love that we have for the one that we lost. And
mm,
so it can be painful when we're rearranging that space inside.
yes.
And yet, if we're willing to move along with it, we can come out on the other end, being able to live life with greater meaning and purpose. And that's what my hope is for everyone that is dealing with grief and loss and the pain of trauma.
Right. Many people who have do turn their grief into something positive in memory of their loved ones. A lot of organizations that were founded on that frequently has been parents or spouse or someone who decided to change the sadness and loss into something that can give back to everybody in the name of the memory of their loved one. So that's one
Absolutely.
thing that I definitely learned. And your spiritual, um, your spiritual lifestyle or habits can really help you get through it. If you don't
Oh,
have,
absolutely.
you don't have anything to hold on to, it is
Mhm.
really difficult to get through that, because if you only believe that your person was a body and that body is no longer there, then it is a great loss. But if you understand that there's still a spiritual being and that they live on, then it makes it easier. But you still do have those sad times.
Well, because we're physical beings, and our senses and so, I have to always remind people that the depth of your pain that you're feeling in loss equates to the depth of your capacity to love.
Hmm.
And so that in itself is a good thing. I mean, I wouldn't want to just not feel or think that, oh, well, this sad thing happened. What's next? So, we honor that in itself as a gift too. So how can we honor our feelings, our emotions, and that sadness just allows us to connect with something that's valuable. Tears are a gift, just, letting them just, it's a way of releasing. So
Hmm.
give yourself permission to cry. I had to compartmentalize my life to get through things moving forward, but I would give myself time every day just to feel my sadness and to cry. Sometimes it would be when I was in my pool, which I was really grateful I had at the time, because just being it or in the shower, you just, let the water wash over you and your tears can kind of blend with that.
Hmm.
And that processes that emotionally so it doesn't get stuck in your body. Um, and when you get triggered, I find with holidays and anniversaries and birthdays and those things, it's like I've created rituals to honor my son. You know, bring him into the experience. Christmas time, I have this adorable little ornament that I found that where you could put a picture in.
Yes.
And so I put my favorite picture of him when he was in first grade, and he was just a cheeky little munchkin. And so that's the last one I put on my tree every year in a place where I can see him to bring him into my experience. And also because he was born December 14th, and his name was Justin, and the family joke was he was born just in time for Christmas.
That's cute.
So Christmas was a really special time for him. But so I bring him into my experience.
Yes.
He is still a part of that. Those are the important things that we learn in navigating grief, which is something that nobody escapes in your lifetime.
That's true. Right. That's beautiful to have some ways to keep them present in your life. That's why my house is full of her art.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
That became her, it was her legacy gift to you.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
Yes, it was. And you know what? She did it when she was in between. So she had a bout with cancer, about 20. I had moved back to Ohio, so I wasn't here with her. So it had to be after 2015. I think about 2017. And they went gung ho to clear it and cure it, supposedly. But during the pandemic, she missed some of those appointments. And after 20, during the pandemic, that's when she learned that she could paint. She,
Oh.
she could discover she could paint during
Mhm.
the pandemic, and she went painted every day, every day. She was texting a new picture, and so she left her legacy of art before she left here. It's like she had to get that out. She hadn't hadn't realized that she had that gift before, but she definitely expressed it during that time. So she did leave that for us, which is a
Well, and
blessing.
I would see that as part of her, her healing process, as a soul level.
Mm,
Because we are creative beings. We are meant to express ourselves. And, I mentioned depression. Sometimes those kind of feelings when is because we have shut down our creative process.
mm,
Just starting to do something that expressing yourself. It might be gardening, it might be listening to music, it might you start to write music. Writing was a process for me. I also started painting too as a healing process. It was just a way of expressing because that's what we are. We're creative, expressive beings. And it allows us to process and move forward and open up our potential. And so she did that. That was beautiful.
yes, yes, it was. Yes, it was. Okay, I just want to go to another topic, if it's fine. I'm in a class with you teaching uh, affirmative prayer.
Yes.
Hold up this nice book that I'm
Hmm.
enjoying reading. Talk a little bit to the audience of affirmative prayer. This is not a unity only audience. And so a lot of people aren't familiar with what affirmative prayer is and the benefits of it. Can you give us a little information?
Well, it's different than traditional prayer. Traditional prayer that we're taught is that we're praying to a supreme being. When we're feeling hopeless, a lot of times, most of the time, we're fearful, we're looking for an answer, we're hoping for something to be fixed, we're hoping that maybe we are deemed um, credible enough to receive a positive answer. Because it's easy to get overwhelmed with life and all the things and not know our way forward. And so prayer in itself is a good thing. It's a way to turn. But when we look at universal spirituality, that is the basis of what Unity teaches, that kind of embraces all different traditions because there is something inherently within all religions that are similar, is if we can let go of the concept of God outside of ourselves, but to realize that our language sometimes can be harmful and that we have to define something that's undefinable. But God is not a being, but a creative energy. a vibrational energy that creates life. And so affirmative prayer is aligning with the divinity that we are and the wholeness that is when we align with that creative energy that we call God. And so there's a flow in that, and that instead of seeking to fix something, it's seeking to align with who I am and knowing the divine wisdom within me will open me up to the infinite possibility of what I need to know. And then it invites us to be collaborative in that I'm courageous enough then to take an action step from that guidance because I have to co-create my experience. It's not going to happen without my participation. So affirmative prayer is a way of aligning with who we are as divine beings to open up to the wisdom and the truth that can enhance our life.
Okay, that sounds great. And so I know people know about affirmations. What's the difference between someone just saying an affirmation and affirmative prayer? Because we direct it to our spirit and to God, but affirmation is supposed to be directed to yourself too.
Well, an affirmation is a positive statement that in its most powerful form is stated in present tense, so as if it already exists. And our human mind will argue with that
Hmm.
because we will like, well, yeah, but what about this and that? It's like that hasn't happened yet. And so what it is like it's almost like um, putting on training wheels of our mind.
Okay.
And so, and we don't start with an affirmation without first releasing any negative thinking that might be blocking our ability to accept truth. So for me, the easy thing is I always start with, I now release anything and everything that no longer serves my wholeness, so that I may open up to the truth and discern the wisdom that guides my way. And then an affirmative statement can be, I am one with my divine wholeness. I am, I am an expression of love, peace, and joy. We are aligning with something that is already the truth of who I am, and I'm planting a seed in my mind so that it becomes the foundation of my thought process, that it underlines the next thought that I have and how I move forward, so that I'm not focusing on what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, what I'm afraid of. I'm focusing on the potential that I want to experience, and I'm saying it in an powerful way as if it already is.
I love that. Yes, it's very powerful to say as to really accept it as it already is. Because if we're part of God, we know that He's taking care of us. I say He, we just can't get out of that. We
I
say
know
it.
it, our language interferes with things, but the thing is that if we're aligning with and we use something repetitively enough, then it becomes a part of our thinking. And so that when I am discerning a challenge or seeking what to do next, that positive concept, that potential of who I am is going to underline my way of beingness. And
Hmm.
so we live more naturally in a positive, open frame of mind. And the thing is, when we begin to understand when we're talking about God and we're aligning with the creative process, everything is energy, everything is a vibration. So if I'm aligning with the energy that allows something positive to happen, then I'm naturally calling that energy to align with me and to bring the possibilities forth. So I might notice all of a sudden something that I hadn't seen before that could enhance my life, that could be the very missing piece that I needed in what I'm wanting to manifest in my life. And we have to get out of our way by overthinking how something's supposed to happen.
Mm.
So affirmative prayer really aligns us with the divine wisdom within us, and so that we can choose the thoughts and take the action steps that will enhance our life.
Thank you. Beautiful. Anything else you'd like to share while we're here together?
Oh my goodness. You know, we're living in a challenging time, and yet I suppose every generation could say that. The challenges of the world, because life is always evolving. Creation is always happening. And sometimes, in order for something good to come forth or a new version, we have to go through the chaos of dismantling what is. And one of the greatest things that I learned from a professor in school is to always question the prior assumption. And so it doesn't mean that what we already do or what we already know or what we're experiencing is wrong, but it could be limiting. So if I look at how I'm doing things, I can ask myself, is there something missing? Is there something that could shift what I'm doing into a more enhanced version? And is there anything that I'm still doing, thinking, or using in my life that is outdated, that's no longer serving the whole, that it's served its purpose, it's time to let it go so I can create space for that new undetermined thing to come into my life. And that is not easy for us as human beings. But if we can align with that creative process of letting go of whatever no longer serves me and creating space to be open to the possibility of trying something new, I think we will all be living in a more enhanced experience of reality. And we can also recognize there is value in all of us.
Definitely. And trying something new, not being afraid to just open your mind and listen to something new, and
Mhm.
just not assuming just because it's not familiar to you that it's not worth listening to or not good for you to hear. So that's beautiful for us to open our hearts and our minds.
Well, and just as every scientist, as they explore different things, it's like a formula, and they discover some things the combination didn't work. So then, okay, so we won't do that again. Let's try another combination. That's the same thing. Spirituality is a science in the same way. And so if we could stop pointing fingers and say it's us and them, but say it's like we are in this together, and what would serve all of us collectively, not just enhance a few or just get away with something because it's the easiest.
Hmm.
What if we could just see that we all have value, and yes, we need to have boundaries and laws to um, set a potential, because as we're learning, just because I might be 50 years old doesn't mean that I'm mature.
Hmm. Right.
And so I might need somebody to kind of help guide me, like, well, that's not okay, but this is, and I
Yes.
can learn from that. But we have the freedom of choice. So let's choose the things that support not only our lives, but the world around us.
Exactly. That's what my new book is about, to get on board the new Underground Railroad. It's about
Oh,
us
cool. Love
looking
it.
at what we can do as individuals to show our love for each other. I say Harriet Tubman's spirit guides us for love and action. Love and actions is the love that you express because of your being, who you are, is what you say, is what you do, is what you think, is how you approach life. And
But
what
it's also being a courageous being. I mean, looking at Harriet Tubman, I mean, she did a courageous thing that, was dangerous in her world. And so, standing for the truth and not being complacent, I think is also important, to be a
Mhm.
voice in the world that makes a difference.
Exactly. Being a voice in the world, standing for the truth. Because so many of us, we look at what's going on and we talk about it and we talk about it and we talk about it,
Hmm.
but we don't do anything to make a difference. Some people aren't even voting to if they don't like the person that's in the office at the time. They're not voting to get things so they don't have to be there anymore.
Well, but
That's
that's a vote in itself.
I mean
It's like,
exactly
and so then we can't complain about the outcome if we didn't participate in the process.
right.
So we're meant to participate, and we can do it with kindness and compassion and from a center of peace. Eventually, you know, it's interesting that there's this concept that being woke is a negative thing.
Mm,
To awaken is what we are required to do so
hmm.
that we can discern a better way forward.
Explain awakening like, in a brief little information for people.
Well, I would say to be awakened is to be aware of the divinity that I am, and so that I seek first within, discern the wisdom that will guide my next steps, rather than look to the world outside to tell me how I should do it. And so to be awakened is to be aware of my divinity and how I can align it with my humanity and let it guide the way. Because our humanity, it serves a purpose. It gives us this physical experience, and it's where our five senses live. But they also can get us in trouble. And
Hmm.
so the wisdom of our divine nature is what should be guiding our way. And that's the teachings of Jesus and all spiritual masters, to seek first within, find the truth, listen to the wisdom, and then use that to define your next thought, word, and action.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate that because I purpose part of my purpose for my podcast is to help people find their self-love. And when I say self-love, I'm saying they're finding the divine within and seeing how they are empowered by that presence and realizing it and understanding it and using it in their lives the way that they
Absolutely.
express their lives. So that's what I am so happy to have you explain that for us.
Thank you. Well, and I realize that I think a spiritual practice, and when we use the word practice, it's because it's something that we haven't achieved yet. We haven't reached the final goal yet, and our whole life is a practice. And so, what practices do I have that can keep me open and courageous and willing to express my potential and keep me grounded in that so that
Hmm.
I don't get distracted when I hear some horrific thing on the news or I'm triggered by my grief. When I see a young man walk down the street that looks just like my son, and I have to hold myself back to not go and hug him and think I'm a
Hmm.
weird lady. But I have to just honor, it's like, oh, it's just like a little reminder of my love for him. I can be grateful for that. So practice is what our life becomes when we choose to express our full potential.
Yes, I like that. Practice is what our life becomes when we choose, and it's all about a choice. We have a choice to, that's one thing we are gifted with. We have a choice. We can do what we want to do, but we just have to face the consequences of making mistakes in
Yeah,
certain directions.
absolutely.
Right.
Our soul is pivotal, and we have free will, which is very empowering, but it requires a spiritual maturity to really discern wisdom. And so our practice allows us to grow into that and to have the confidence and the courage to listen to the voice within. Because oftentimes what we're being encouraged to do when you feel like a strong call, and then there's a part of yourself that goes, oh my God, that would be so hard. I'll probably fail and then I'll embarrass myself. That's your human self. But your soul can choose to choose to define what the wisdom within is saying and have the courage to step out and do it anyway.
And
That's what I would say to younger people is have that courage to live your potential before you're 50 years old and you go, I wish I would have known this. The things you could do much earlier, but whenever you wake up and realize that I have this divine wisdom and I seek within first is a good thing.
Yes, it is. Whenever, as long as you're here, you still have opportunity to do that.
Mhm.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you. This has been a very interesting and motivating discussion. And I'm just going to ask if there's anything else you'd like to share before we close.
Oh, I just would like you and everyone to join with me, and as we align um, with peace, compassion, kindness, and the courage to stand in the face of those that are not supporting the good for all, but to be the demonstration of that in everything we think, say, and do. I just invite everyone to walk a greater path and to make a difference in the world because we each have the capacity to do that.
Yes, we do. And that's what I call love in action. Thanks for
Absolutely.
closing that way. Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Carol.
You're welcome. Well, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I surely did. As a mother who's lost her child, hearing from Reverend Megan about how grief can be a gift, I know that experience. It doesn't come quickly or automatically, but it will come. And I hope that you will take this into your heart and share it with any others who may be going through a time of grief so that they know that there is light at the end of the road. If this interview resonated with you and you're interested in hearing more, do subscribe. This interview will be listed on YouTube, but also in my Substack community, which is where you will find more interviews and the newsletter that gives you information to keep you updated. So please do subscribe and share. And I love, simply love to hear your comments. Love in actions is what I hope you will remember. And that's love in your words, your thoughts, every action you take. Thank you for being here.